The crisis rocking Ukraine may have started taking a toll on Nigeria and Africa in general, a development that may have prompted the African Development Bank to earmark $1.5 billion emergency food plan for Africa. According to the president of the AFDB, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, who made this known during a meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari, he disclosed that the war has pushed up the price of food commodities by about 60% across the continent. The AFDB's president maintains that maize and other grains will not be spared from the crisis, noting that there may be a fertilizer crisis, as there would be about 2 million metric tons deficit in development if the well-managed affect food production by about 20% and cause Africa to lose about 11 billion US dollars. Joining me via Zoom to look at this, he is an investment research analyst at United Capital PLC, Mr. Ayorinde Akinloye. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Tolu, for having me on the call. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Yes, it's a two-way thing. First, the AFDB came out to say that they predict that the energy prices and, of course, food price hike and all of that will affect Nigeria and other countries. Later, the focus is now on food. First, what is your reaction to this before we now go into the basics of what they intend to do to support Nigeria and other countries?
Yes, definitely. The crisis in Ukraine. We all know for well over 2 months now, Russia has invaded Ukraine and they've been engaged in military actions. War, and that has created lots of instability across the global economy. And one of the key points of impact is really going to be felt on food prices, on food agriculture as a whole, considering the fact that Russia and Ukraine, they play very strategic roles in production of quite a number of agricultural produce. So, for example, both Russia and Ukraine, they are among the top 3 producers for some key agricultural commodities, for example, like wheat, maize, sunflower, or things like rapeseed, for example, also. So they take a very strategic position that even in terms of fertilizer production, Russia is among the top exporters of all the different types of fertilizers you can talk about: phosphorus fertilizers, potassium fertilizers, and all the different fertilizers. At least Russia will be in the top 3 of those countries. So with the crisis ongoing there, first in Ukraine, where there's a lot of production of wheat and maize, Russia and Ukraine combined together produce almost about 30% of the total wheat that we consume across the globe. So that points to how strategic they are when it comes to food production and food exports. So in a country like Ukraine, where so many infrastructure have been demolished, definitely there would be no farming activities going on as much. Also, seaports and export terminals will also be closed. So there's no way for Ukraine to be able to supply the globe with wheat and other key agricultural products. Similar for Russia, yes, Russia may not be facing so much of infrastructure damage, or the war is not actively taking place in Russia, but there is that moral preference to sort of ignore Russian exports. So countries are reluctant to buy Russian exports because of that moral preference, so as not to look as they are funding the war going on in Ukraine. So that as a result of that, that's going to basically create, number one, shortage for food, and ultimately significant surge in prices of food products and items. And according to the food FAO, they are basically projecting that well between 8 to 13 million more people will become malnourished, and they are projecting that a lot of that is going to come from sub-Saharan Africa. So this very much corroborates what the AFDB is saying, and it's definitely important for us to do something to salvage the situation, because we might just be feeling mild effects of it now. It will get much worse as we get later into the year.
Exactly, and to fend for this crisis, there's the need to expand production, which is what the FDB is looking at. But before we look at what the FDB is doing, I would ask you, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, we have the rice pyramid, and I think we had something around the maize pyramid, all of the efforts by the CBN, and of course, a little support from the fiscal side. How well are we doing with regards to that before we add up what the AFDB intends to do to support Africa?
Okay, so in terms of our efforts at ensuring food sufficiency for Nigeria, for example, yes, a lot of efforts have gone into this. We recall 2015, the CBN set up the LandBorder program, with the goal of funding smallholder farmers to be able to cultivate large hectares of lands across different agricultural products, rice, maize, and variety of agricultural products. But the question today is how well have these funds been utilized? How well have they been deployed and utilized, such that with a crisis like this, are we going to be able to say we won't feel the impact? The truth is, yes, we've had the rice pyramid recently, we've had the maize pyramid, but in terms of actual permeation into the food market in Nigeria, we're actually not seeing the effect. If anything is to go by, we've actually seen food prices, surge significantly over the past 1 to 2 years. We've seen, month-on-month increase in food prices across different types of food items that you can consider. So the issue we have is there are lots of legacy issues that need to be resolved, beyond just funding, beyond just providing the necessary funds, which, yes, there have been a lot of funds committed to agricultural products in Nigeria, or agricultural and farming in Nigeria well over the past, say, 5 to 7 years now. But the truth is, there are lots of challenges that must be solved before we can feel the impact of the funds that are being deployed. Otherwise, these funds are basically going to yield nothing in terms of having an actual impact on food supply as well as on prices of these food items. So, for example, we look at these legacy issues. One is the issue of insecurity, right? So many farmers, if you recall a while back, when during the process of recovering some of the loans that were given to some of the farmers under the LandBorder program, a lot of these farmers complained that some of them ended up using these funds, to sort of, it was out there in the media that some of them had to, use these funds to, for example, pay ransom in some cases of kidnap cases. In some cases, some of these farmers did not know how to properly use those funds to acquire maybe the right farming instruments or the right farming equipment, which again speaks to the issue of farmer education, right? Educating them on, getting the right facilities, the proper tools that they can use to actually improve productivity, such that by cultivating the same hectare of land, you are still able to even produce more because you're able to, plant more, your crops are able to grow faster, you're able to use better quality inputs and the like. So, issues around security, issues around farmer education, issues around, the agric infrastructure itself from a storage point of view and from a transportation point of view. Storage is one of the biggest issues that we have right now. For example, we're in the mango season where, there's a lot of harvest of mangoes right now. But the truth is, later in the year, we won't be seeing mangoes again. Why? Because when we have it during the harvest season now, we are not going to be able to store and have them ready or still fresh and good by the time is the planting season. So these are all issues that needs to be resolved before we can begin to really feel the impact. Yes, so conclusively, yes, there have been lots of funding, lots of sound bites around investing in agriculture and improving food sufficiency. But the truth is, the impact is not being felt in the market. It's not being felt on food prices. It's not being felt on food supply. Why? Because there are lots of legacy issues that must be tackled before we can really begin to see the fruits of increased funding for agriculture.
Okay, Ayo, let's now look at our land borders, which has been shut for some time, I think almost 2 years. And part of the reasons is because of the movement of food and all of that. What is your assessment with regards to this move? Many say it's just a waste of time. And some are saying that, well, it's impacted positively, negatively. You're an investment analyst. What do you think? And how has that helped us in any way?
Well, first, definitely the closure of the borders in 2019 from a food supply or food security point of view, was not, does not, is not, it was not a right decision, because one, we didn't have the local capacity to fill that supply gap. Because what happens is when you close the borders, it means we are not able to import or bring in some of those products, some of those food items that we typically bring into the country. Either, yes, through legal means in some cases illegal means. Yes, that it's, we acknowledge the fact that a lot of smuggling activities, we're also seeing, all that when the borders were open. Insecurity was also a key issue around that too. But in terms of food supply, we've actually not been able to, we've not been able to develop our local production capacity to close that supply gap that was going to result from closing the borders. So we think it was ill-timed. And right now, yes, about 4 of these borders, the remaining 4 borders, have now been opened. Now, again, we like to watch how things will develop over the next few months to see, are we going to see an improvement in food supply? Are we going to see, increased importation of some of these food items such that to bring down prices? But like we know, prices in the Nigerian market is very much sticky upwards. They hardly come down, and they almost certainly will continue to go up. Why? Because again, beyond just the market dynamics of demand and supply, there's always that tendency to take advantage of higher prices, particularly when there's no huge, there are no lots of alternatives in the market. So the opening of the border, where it's going to take a while for us to really begin to see the impact, if any, on food supply or food production. But definitely, the closure of the borders in 2019 was definitely not the right policy decision, because we didn't have the local capacity to fill the gap that was going to come as a result of shutting the borders. And that definitely created significant problems in terms of food prices and food supply. We saw food prices rally significantly in the weeks and months following after that. Is the reverse going to be the case now? It's a struggle to say that's going to be the case, because again, we mentioned earlier that there's a global food shortage, right? So it's just beyond the land borders right now. There are so many other factors that will likely outweigh the impact of the border closure or the border reopening in whichever case you look at it. So we don't expect it to have to change the landscape of things in terms of food supply and food prices significantly, broadly, because there are so many other factors that would impact that. And then number 2, we know that prices are mostly sticky upwards in Nigeria. They hardly come down, and so we may not necessarily see a necessary positive impact on that front.
Interesting stuff. We know we still expect this $1.5 billion to be ratified by the board of the AFDB. I don't know if you are thinking along that. Do you think it will scale through easily, since the focus is on Africa?
Well, definitely. I think one of the key responsibilities for institutions like the AFDB definitely is to provide some sort of security for the region in which for their members, basically, in times of crisis. I mean, for example, in 2020, when we had the COVID outbreak, the initial shock, and economies of the world were trying to adjust. We had the World Bank interventions, we had the IMF intervention. So, I mean, it's something that we think the probability of that scaling through is very likely, because, I mean, this is what an organization like the AFDB is, these are one of the reasons why they were created or why they were established. In times of crisis like this, they're able to provide support for all the different member countries that they have. So we think it's something that has a very strong chance of scaling through, and we see the possibility of those funds being approved. Again, the concern is not really on if it will be approved or not. The likelihood of being ratified and approved is quite high, but the question is going to be around how will these funds be deployed.
Oh, let's look at some basics. This morning, this $1.5 billion is supposed to at least empower 5 million smallholder farmers, and they will be helped to cultivate 1 million hectares of maize, rice, and 250,000 acres of sorghum and soya beans. Impact is what I'm talking about. Last few weeks, 40,000 tons, metric tons of grains were being released by the Ministry of Agri. Impact. What impact do you think this will have on a country of more than 200 million people?
Well, definitely, we think that in terms of the initiative, right? In terms of the initiative, in terms of the idea around this emergency food plan, yes, it's a nice one. It's a brilliant one in terms of trying to at least, think ahead. We know that there is a crisis coming. We know that food supply, we are going to be facing significant shortage of food supply very soon if the crisis in Russia, in Ukraine is not resolved, in good time. So what impact will this have? A significant impact on food prices and food supply. If properly implemented, if the funds are properly disbursed and, they go to the right problems. So when I say the right problems, for example, it's beyond just making the funds available to the farmers. It's more or less around ensuring that those funds, tackle the most important problems. And then also, it's going to be very critical to ensure that issues of insecurity are resolved. Because, for example, these funds are going to come, hopefully they will come in good time for us as we approach the planting season, for farmers to plant, and then as we await the events before another harvest period, right? So if these funds come in good time, it will be important for issues of things like insecurity to be taken care of, because that is what will give farmers confidence to go back to their farms again. The farming population has declined significantly over the past couple of years due to some of these issues around insecurity in the Middle Belt and in some of the key food producing states in the north, right? So these issues must be resolved before we can even see the real impact on food supply and food output. Now, in terms of the impact it would have directly on households, right? Definitely, the Nigerian economy needs way more than that in terms of food supply, food consumption, and food demand in Nigeria. Definitely, we need way more than that to ensure that we don't really go into a significant food crisis. So, despite the fact that these resources may be limited, they must be used efficiently in order to at least have some decent results. But beyond that, a lot more needs to be done to ensure that we get more funding and more policies are put in place to ensure that that segment of that sector thrives to improve food supply and food production. Now, away from all this, in terms of looking at the crisis in the short term, we have to ensure also that we have a long-term view. In terms of when crises like this come up in the future, we are well prepared ahead, such that we have strong, adequate food supply, even within the domestic economy, without relying so much on external supply. So beyond just mitigating the immediate impact on the Nigerian economy and the populace, it's important to also begin to cultivate a long-term view to solve some of these challenges. So yes, the funding been pretty decent, but a lot more. The agricultural sector will definitely need a lot more. And even with these limited resources, they need to be used adequately. And then the platform must be right, in terms of issues around insecurity, around farming infrastructure. They must be gotten right in order to ensure that we get the right value out of these funds.
Ayo, before I let you go, Ayo, any focus when we talk about Nigeria now for agriculture? Are we talking about mechanizing farming, making it attractive to the young ones? Or is it the planting process that needs to be enhanced? Or storage? Or value addition? Which do you think will be like a good one? Quick wins for us.
Quick wins. Well, in terms of quick wins, when we say quick wins, I would imagine issues that we can resolve, say, before the end of this year, particularly as we go into the planting cycle, the next planting cycle. I think the quality of farm inputs, is what we can really, really quickly get a hold of in terms of the farming process, right? So how do we go about our farming process What quality of inputs do we use in terms of fertilizers, in terms of seeds? Those are quick points that we can tick. And then other issues around improving the attractiveness of farming to the youth, or to the youth, basically something that can take a mid to long term view. And once the population sees that agriculture is viable from a revenue point of view, from a profitability point of view, then definitely to attract the investments in it, either from either youths going into agriculture or firms providing the necessary funding required, right? So in the long run, we can now look at those ones as quick as long-term, mid to long-term objectives. But in the short term, quick wins that we can look at is, as we go into the next planting cycle, we have to get, as the best in class, seed quality for farming. We also have to ensure that our farming processes, in terms of mechanized farming or subsistence farming, we have to get it right by ensuring mechanized farming, and then also gradually ensure farmer education, on a step-by-step basis, to help them come to terms with using these facilities in their farming processes also. So those are the quick points right now that could have significant positive effects even before the end of the year. But even something around security, for example, issues around security is something that, yes, insecurity is not something that can just be cured in like maybe 2 or 3 months, but there are still things that can be done to sort of give farmers confidence to go back to their farmlands, because we have quite a number of farmers that no longer go back to the farmland. So this is also another quick point that we can fix, while we now think of long-term solutions to resolving the infrastructure issues. To resolve the security issues that we have. Then lastly, the infrastructure one is more of a long-term thing, largely because of how capital intensive it's going to be, in terms of having the right storage facilities, having the right road network and all that we need. So those ones will be more long-term due to how capital intensive they could be. So that would be how I would split across those key challenges.
From you, as usual, Mr. Ayorinde Akinloye there, investment research analyst, United Capital PLC. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me, Toyo. Always a pleasure.